Beginning way back in 1982, most famously on the old Atari 2600, on which it's often touted as one of the best games in that extensive library, Pitfall was certainly not a new series by the time it made its way to Game Boy Color. Surprisingly perhaps, the original Game Boy didn't have an entry, but both the NES and Super NES did, the latter of which, Pitfall: The Mayan Adventure, eventually also found its way onto the Game Boy Advance. This one shares a name with a game that came out on both the PlayStation and the Saturn in 1998, but that's about it. The story, such as it is roughly the same, but the gameplay here is much more akin to the older 2D side-scrolling platformers than the 3D stylings of the console release. You play as Pitfall Harry Jr., if that is his real name, through 4 levels as he plunges into a magical rift within the steaming jungles of South America to enter a new dimension filled with treachery. You'll start in the wilderness, which isn't really all that wild to be honest, then navigate underground tunnels, a volcano, a prison, and then finally challenge the Scourge, the presumably evil entity responsible for whatever jeopardy it is that you're faced with here. According to the manual, you're protecting the Moku people from him, but you wouldn't know that by playing the game. The control schemes here are gonna take some getting used to, and unfortunately the actual bullshittery that's almost expected with Game Boy Color platformers by this point might convince you against actually wanting to put in the work. A large part of what the game requires from you, in fact 95% of it, revolves around some sort of jumping action. I mean, it is Pitfall after all. This could be up or down ledges, across narrow platforms, avoiding obstacles or enemies, and of course it wouldn't be a Pitfall game without some sort of grabbing onto inexplicably perpetually swinging ropes. There are several different types of jump though, and the controls differentiating them are so annoyingly close to each other. Pressing A does a medium height jump, and you can extend this a smidge by also pushing up. These are fine, if not all that useful. There are 2 other types of jump that it's all too common to get mixed up. Pressing forward first and then A does the running jump that you'll want to be using most of the time, but if you press A ever so slightly first or even simultaneously with the direction, you'll do this bizarre upward and slightly forward jump that you only ever need to use to get onto ledges or occasionally over a rolling log or something. Thing is, unless you're precise enough, you'll do the latter instead of the former and just infuriatingly plummet down a pit. That's such an immediate turn-off when a platformer doesn't stump the player through tricky and interesting platform layouts, but rather through messy and imprecise controls. It just feels like such a cop-out. And on the flip side, once you master the controls, there's no challenge left. The layouts are anything but interesting. It's basically the same thing for the entirety of the game. Each of the 4 worlds, if you like, are split into several levels, with each world introducing a new thing into the equation. None of these are anything you wouldn't expect: crumbling or moving platforms, conveyor belts, hooks to grab onto and flip off. The odd few enemies here and there don't ever aggro on you, they just flap back and forth in their predetermined patterns, so once you figure out where to stand, they're all super easy to take care of. Shame you only have a pickaxe thing with the dumbest short range ever, but honestly with the lack of challenge they pose, that's all you really need. The times they cause damage are when you do a running jump into the unseen ahead of you, and one of the blighters is in the exact wrong position. Even so, their presence is never anything other than a silly contrivance. The worst thing, however, is the rope jumping. Now, I don't know how it was in the Atari version because even though I love retro gaming, I really don't want to go back that far. But if a game is as touted to be amongst the highlights of a system, I can't imagine it was as finicky as this. It's the same as everything else in this game. Once you learn to do a running jump when the rope end is at the zenith of its swing, it's immaterial and you'll make it nearly every time. But getting to that point results in loads of really dumb deaths, and a death anywhere on the stage takes you back to the start. Oh, goody. Let's try to give some compliments to Pitfall though, because it's not all bad. The backgrounds here are amongst the nicest looking so far on the system. Sure, they're often just horizontal strips of colour placed in a gradient fashion, but it's both really effective on the GBC screen and a nice nod to the original game too, which did a similar thing. When there are waterfalls or lava, it's excellently animated and doesn't crowd the screen. Even Harry's movement is quite smooth. The music could have used a bit more work, but it's not abrasive by any means and fills a gap adequately. And look, this was never going to be anything highbrow or in-depth, because that's not what games like this are about. It just needed way more variation. All the levels are the same in principle, and there's little jeopardy except for the rubbish control scheme, not even a boss fight until the very end of the game. At no point while playing this did I feel any excitement, any intrigue, any curiosity. The whole thing from start to finish was just an irritating, drab, lackluster experience that I don't care to revisit anytime soon.